I've watched Twister ever since I was a little kid, and even though I've always enjoyed it, I mostly thought of it as just a fun disaster movie. Entertaining, but nothing amazing. Leave it to another low-effort remake to make me appreciate the original more.
Dodge whatever's in there, it's big and it's moving fast. Drive! Go, go, go!
So I was able to see Twisters months in advance. That's important to mention because the version I saw is not the same as the version you would see in theaters. For the most part, it's going to be the same movie, but there may have been a few small tweaks. Obviously, the biggest change is that I saw the unfinished visual effects, which I'll talk more about later. In preparation for the screening, I went back and watched Twister for the billionth time. However, this time I experienced something that's happened to me a lot in recent years. The more I learn about filmmaking, the more I appreciate movies I've always enjoyed because I start seeing the effort put into them. Twister may not be a masterpiece of filmmaking, but it is a pretty well-made movie. It does a good job of setting up the characters, giving you enough personality to like them. It very quickly and simply explains their goal, and then they're off chasing tornadoes. Along the way, we establish the villains and we learn more about the characters. It's not overcomplicated. It sets you up quick and then gets right into the main hook. The characters are simple but memorable. The writing isn't Oscar-winning, but there are a lot of quotable lines. The effects have held up surprisingly well for being almost 30 years old. Hell, I believe this tornado effect from 1996 way more than I believe this plane crash in the Beetlejuice 2 trailer.
The juice is loose.
All in all, Twister is a solid movie. It's nowhere near deep, but it does exactly what it's supposed to, and it does it in a memorable way. So now let's talk about how Twisters fucks it all up. First off, Twisters is not really a remake, it's basically fan fiction. They copied the concept enough that they had to give Michael Crichton a writing credit despite him being dead, which, by the way, did you know that Michael Crichton wrote Twister? This Michael Crichton? Yeah, I learned that recently. Remember when competent people wrote movies?
Well, I felt at the time that cinema, at least the movies I had been seeing, were at an all-time low. Everything was anti-society, anti-Christ, anti-government, anti-everything, and there was no one to root for.
But anyway, I digress. Twisters is ultimately a different story from Twister. It just looks kinda similar, but trust me, nothing you like about Twister is in this movie. It's different characters, a different goal, multiple plot points that go nowhere. Again, it's just someone's fan fiction with the Twister skin suit on. So let's break it down.
Let me break it down for you, Cecil.
If it's been a while since you've seen Twister, I guarantee you the opening is better than you remember. The music is ominous and it's just this dark, cloudy background that quickly speeds up like a tornado is forming. Then we cut to establishing shots that get progressively darker as a storm comes in. We meet Jo, one of our main characters, and we see that she tragically loses her father. This entire scene maintains a serious tone. Everything is dark and terrifying. It's a great way to start a movie about natural disasters. Meanwhile, in Twisters, the opening is just some grass and the title.
You serious?
Right off the bat, we get a clear indication of just how little this film gives a shit. The title sequence is lazy and absolutely no atmosphere is established. Imagine if instead of this opening to Jurassic Park, we got this. Oh, but don't worry, the rest of the opening is definitely memorable, just not in the way they intended. We're introduced to the main character and her friends, who are all just so happy to be alive. Don't think about the fact that most of them aren't in the majority of the trailers, they'll be fine.
Liar!
So anyway, all but 2 of them get killed, and this genuinely made me laugh. After they try to use barrels of absorbent chemicals to stop a tornado.
No, I am not shitting you.
It shockingly fails, and most of the characters have to run away from an EF5 tornado, while one friend is stuck outside of the storm, unable to help them. They end up running in a line of who's gonna die. No, seriously, the guy at the back of the line gets comically sucked up, then the girl in front of him gets sucked from under an overpass, then the main character and her happy-to-be-alive boyfriend take cover and, you guessed it, he gets sucked too, and not in the good way. Not only did I feel nothing for these characters, but the way they died actually made me laugh. It will never not be funny to see someone just suddenly fly up into the air out of frame. Now, obviously, we didn't know Joe's father in Twister when he died, but anyone can understand how terrible it would be to lose a parent. You don't need to know who he was to know that he meant a lot to his daughter. Meanwhile, these characters have only been on screen for a couple minutes, and losing a supposedly close friend or even a boyfriend doesn't create as much sympathy in the viewer as losing a parent does. I don't know who these people are, and the way they're presented makes it pretty obvious that they're going to die, especially the boyfriend, so why should I care? Oh no, not what's his name? Oh no, I'll really miss... girl. It's just a lazy way to set up a tragic event for the main character so she can move to another state and then be convinced to come back years later. And all that happens in the first 10 to 15 minutes of the movie, so it just feels like a waste of time.
Exposition. Rise in action. Climax. Fall in action.
Okay, so the plot is really simple. The main character gets convinced to come back home and chase tornadoes because her one friend who survived at the beginning, which was never shown, it just cuts to years later and he's alive, I guess, is now ex-military and he has access to advanced imaging technology that he wants to use to get 3D images of tornadoes. And he needs these images because his boss, a cartoonish real estate tycoon who's barely in this movie, is buying up land from people whose homes and businesses were destroyed. But there are also a bunch of YouTuber storm chasers who happen to be in the same place also looking for tornadoes, so the two groups have to compete with each other until we inevitably find out that the main character's friend is working for the bad guy. Then the main character and Glenn Powell get the hots for each other, and he decides to help her improve her old idea of using highly absorbent chemicals to destabilize and stop a tornado. Like I said, it's really simple. I'll delve more into some of these details, but holy shit is the plot all over the place. Half of it doesn't make sense and ultimately goes nowhere. The whole stopping a tornado thing is interesting in concept, but the whole movie should have just been about that. Twister very quickly sets up the goal. Get Dorothy into a tornado. The sensors send back valuable data, and that means we can establish a better early warning system. It's explained in about a minute.
You see, Melissa, it's like this. These sensors go up the funnel and radio back information about the internal structure, wind velocities, flow asymmetries. We could learn more in 30 seconds than I have in the past 30 years. Get a profile of a tornado for the first time.
And what will that do?
If we knew how a tornado really worked, we could design an advanced warning system.
Bill's wife is basically a stand-in for the audience in this scene. Even if you know nothing about any of this stuff, the characters explain their mission in a way even children could understand, and the rest of the movie is about trying to accomplish that mission. Twisters establishes a questionable but interesting concept, shows it immediately failing miserably, and then dicks around for half the runtime before coming back to that same concept because it's important for the climax. Nothing introduced after the opening up to the midpoint of the movie is important to the climax. The script just forgets about most of it. Even the character development during the first half of the movie is mostly a waste of time.
Who am I? What am I?
So we're reintroduced to the main character's friend, who now works for some kind of corporation. When they go back home, they're driving clean fleet vehicles that are all the same color. Meanwhile, Glenn and his pals all drive quirky, distinct vehicles. This right here is such an odd decision. Anyone who's seen Twister knows that these are just a repeat of Jonas's team, and these are just a ripoff of Joe and Bill's team. The movie actually wants you to believe that the uniform corporate guys are good and the unique cool guys are bad. Glenn Powell's team is presented as just a bunch of obnoxious YouTubers who don't care about endangering the lives of strangers by running them off the road. They're in it for attention and money. Then suddenly, when it's important to the plot, Glenn Powell turns from a dumb, obnoxious hick into a college graduate with a heart of gold who gives out food to the homeless. These characters are simply written one way early on and then written completely different later when the plot needs them to be good guys. But again, if you've seen Twister, why would you think that the more relatable and unique characters are the bad guys and the Jonas Brothers are the good guys? The movie is showing you who you should trust, but is written like it thinks you're too stupid to notice. Now, of course, the ex-military friend character is presented like a well-meaning guy. He basically lies to the main character by not telling her who he's working for and tells her to fuck off when they're speaking in private, but he's kind of redeemed in the end. He also has a really good line when he and the main character see the damage done to a small town after a tornado hits. And I quote, "What do tornadoes have against small towns?"
No, I am not shitting you.
I don't know if this was supposed to be funny in a scene that clearly isn't meant to be funny, or if they genuinely thought this was a good line that a real person who isn't stupid would say. The movie also insisted that the main character was super smart without really showing us. It was just insisted, not proven. In Twister, Bill had instincts, but he wasn't treated like a physics genius who was going to quote-unquote save the world with some Bond villain-style plan. Daisy Edgar Jones didn't do a bad job playing the main character, whose name I forgot immediately after I left the theater, but no one in this movie was given good material. Glenn Powell was just another version of the character from Top Gun Maverick. I didn't dislike his performance in this, but again, the writing was just non-existent. Most of the other characters are pointless. Glenn Powell's team just exists to look similar to far more memorable characters from Twister, but they do very little. The only other character on the Jonas Brothers team who I even remember was the guy who was riding with the main character's friend just before the climax. When the friend wants to go and help a nearby town prepare for an incoming tornado, this guy seriously says, "I don't care about the people." That's the level of writing we get in this movie. Just an on-the-nose, I'm a bad guy statement. It's even worse because the line just comes out of nowhere. This guy wasn't previously established as a heartless asshole. He wasn't established as anything at all. Again, it's just whatever the plot needs at this specific moment. Speaking of which, this scene is basically where the whole real estate tycoon plot ends. We never see Doug Dimmadome again, and it has no impact on the climax. It was just a waste of time. Compare this to Twister, where we had Jonas. Yeah, he's an asshole, but he's not a cartoon villain. He's not trying to take advantage of innocent people.
He's in it for the money, not the science.
That one line tells us everything we need to know. Jonas is arrogant and self-centered. And just before his arrogance gets him killed, the main characters warn him because they genuinely don't want him to get hurt. They're rivals, but Jonas isn't the devil. With how little development this character gets, he's very easy to understand. And the realistic relationship with Bill and Joe gives us an opportunity to learn more about them as characters. When Jonas dies, they don't cheer. They tried to save him, and they're disappointed that they couldn't get past his arrogance. Again, it's so simple, but it does so much. Meanwhile, Twisters takes more time to accomplish less.
Fucking thing sucks!
So again, the version that I saw had unfinished effects. What I can tell you about that is, nothing in this movie is practical. It's all CGI, and even what you see in the trailers is more dated than the effects in this 1996 movie.
These tornadoes are more realistic than any tornadoes anyone has ever seen on film. More realistic than any tornadoes anyone has ever seen on film. More realistic than any tornadoes anyone has ever seen on film. More realistic than any tornadoes anyone has ever seen on film.
Magic trick of this movie is the blurred lines between visual and practical effects.
Man, I'm scared to death. Man, I'm scared to death.
At least 8 people died throughout the movie, and most of the deaths meant absolutely nothing. They were people we didn't know, so why would we care? We only see 2 people die in Twister, and those deaths actually matter. Going all the way up to 8 is, for lack of a better term, overkill. It just felt like they wanted the impact of people dying to make it seem more intense, but we don't care about any of these people, and each death is almost comedic. This whole scene is unintentionally funny. It's right after the rodeo scene. The 2 main characters run into a motel to ask if there's a shelter, but there are people arguing with the manager as the tornado siren is going off. They ignore the main characters because they don't believe there's actually a tornado, which is stupid. You're in Oklahoma. Why would you ever not take the situation seriously when the siren goes off? I'm from Indiana. We don't have as many tornadoes, but if you hear the siren going off, even if it's just a really powerful storm, you take that seriously. Severe weather is always a concern. This had to be written by someone from California who has never seen severe weather. But what's funny is, the siren actually gets cut off. The storm perfectly slices off the siren so these stupid characters can say, "See, the siren stopped." Then the fucking siren crashes through the front of the motel because, of course it does. Everyone runs outside and the woman from the motel keeps repeating, "There's a tornado! There's a tornado!" See, because earlier she said there wasn't a tornado, but now she's acknowledging she was wrong by saying there is a tornado. Is this supposed to be funny? It's written like we're supposed to laugh at how stupid these people are being. They die, by the way. They try to escape in a truck instead of following the main characters for some reason, and they get easily sucked into the tornado. It didn't help that the unfinished effects for this shot made it look so much more comical. What am I supposed to feel for these unrealistically stupid characters, especially when you try to throw humor into what you're insisting is a serious, life-threatening situation? Immediately after that is an intense scene where the main characters are hiding in an empty swimming pool, but even then one random guy is told to lay flat on his stomach, and he just immediately stands up. So, obviously he dies, but he just flies out of view, and it's so funny looking. The tone in this scene is just so inconsistent. Speaking of inconsistency, the wind physics made absolutely no sense. I wrote down so many questions about the climax. Long story short, a big motherfucking tornado is heading for a small town and the main character goes off alone to stop it because going with anyone else might accidentally lead to character development. But here are the questions that I wrote. The winds of this tornado were powerful enough to move a trolley off its tracks, so why didn't they pick up the truck when the main character drives into the heart of the tornado? How does a lightweight drone fly into a storm? How can they close double doors with winds strong enough to do this? What's keeping those doors closed? Even earlier in the movie, they established that Glenn Powell's truck can anchor to the ground, but they have a trailer full of bounty paper towels or whatever it is to absorb the tornado, and the trailer isn't anchored in any way. It's just a regular trailer, so I have no idea how it stays perfectly fine in the middle of a fucking tornado. Every element of this movie is obviously worse compared to Twister. Even the music was terrible. The song choices were completely forgettable and the score was non-existent. In my last video, I talked about the score for Twister. If you haven't heard it in a while, or haven't heard it at all, go and listen to it. From the ominous notes we hear throughout the movie that we first hear in the opening to the great transition from orchestra to Van Halen, the music in Twister is so much better. They didn't give a shit about the music in this movie. After everything I've pointed out, it should be obvious that they didn't give a shit about anything. Now, I want to be clear in saying that I don't hate this movie. To anyone who hasn't seen Twister for comparison, I'm sure Twisters would mostly be forgettable. But watching them almost back to back made it so clear how much more effort was put into the original. Even the best parts of Twisters are underwhelming at best, but most of it is just a lazy mess. It would be one thing if it was just forgettable, but the only memorable lines were stupid ones, the only memorable scenes were unintentionally funny, half of the plot goes nowhere, the other half is more predictable than the sunrise, most of the characters don't matter, and you don't even get the benefit of good effects. The only cool thing this movie had was the ability to drive into a tornado, but that isn't a new concept. The most visually interesting thing in this movie isn't even an original idea. That says a lot. Anyway, I'm done talking about this movie. If you want to see it, just know that no matter how much you might enjoy it in the moment, you will ultimately forget about it. I guarantee it. There is nothing of substance here. Again, I don't hate this movie. I'm not saying it's the worst film of all time. I'm just saying it's a waste of time. My expectations weren't that high to begin with, and I was still significantly disappointed. My recommendation? Go watch Twister instead. I'm Dracona, and have a nice day.